Hi everyone. Today we're going to be attempting an audio restoration and analysis on a 911 call. So this is the audio from Patsy Ramsey's call to 911 on the morning of JonBenet Ramsey's murder. This file was obtained from jameson245.com. It is an MP3 file. This was the cleanest, clearest file that I could find. There may be a better one out there, but as of the time of this recording, this was the best copy that I could find. So just a small idea of my background. I've studied acoustics and audio engineering. I've also taught the same. I've been a consultant on construction for mixing and recording studios and acoustic treatment. I've worked in post-production for TV, movies, and during that time I did a bunch of reality TV documentary work where my duties included restoring some non-ideal audio recordings, like things from construction sites, in vehicles, other non-ideal environments, where the goal was to preserve the intelligibility of speech, figure out what people were saying and how to best get that across to the audience. So the tool that I used there was Isotope RX, and this is a spectral audio analyzer. So unfortunately, a lot of the pertinent details of this process are fairly technical. I will be going into all of the technical details in a way that I hope will be easily understood by any layperson, but there are a number of technical factors that do play into how this data is interpreted. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a listen to the file unaltered. And then the next thing is I will take you through a brief tour of how this program works and what I'm going to do to try and get more out of this audio. So here is the original.
Police. What's going on? 515th Street. What's going on there, ma'am? We have a kidnapping. Hurry, please. Explain to me what's going on, okay? There's a note left and our daughter's gone. A note was left and your daughter is gone? How old is your daughter? 6 years old. She's blonde. 6 years old. How long ago was it? I don't know. I just found the note. And my daughter's... Does it say who took her? What? Does it say who took her? I don't know. There's a ransom note here. It's a ransom note? It says SBTC. Victory. Please. Okay, what's your name? Are you Patsy Ramsey? I'm the mother. Oh my God. Please. I'm sending an officer over, okay? Please. Do you know how long she's been gone? No, I don't. Please, we just got out. Is she right here? Oh my God, please. Okay, well, please, somebody. I am, honey. Please. Take a deep breath, please, okay? Hurry. Patsy.
Okay, so that is the content of the call. Yeah, before we get into any sort of analysis, we can see kind of roughly from left to right, this is when the call starts, there's a couple of clicking sounds, and then this is when people start talking. There's a little bit of, noise, dead at the end, and then there's a little more interference. This is the standard view you would see in most audio software, but this is not the strength of this program, and that doesn't help us with the analysis that much. This is what's called a spectral analysis program, and what this does is this will analyze the frequency content of the call. So just very briefly, the bottom of the screen represents low frequencies, the top of the screen represents high frequencies. This whole screen represents the full range of human hearing. So down here, this would be something like a bass, a truck rumbling outside your door. Up in here, we'd have like birds singing, and then above this would kind of be more like a clarity or an openness in sound. So what this view allows us to do is get a slightly more detailed idea of what's happening at each point. So we can see here's where that noise is, and I can show both at the same time, where that noise is at the beginning, where those clicks are, and here we can see the voices. So just very briefly, we'll go over a couple of ideas that are happening here. There are two general types of sound. There's what we would all recognize as noise, like and anything like that counts as noise. And then there's what we would call a tonal sound. And that is something that, like my voice would be an example of a tone. Most musical instruments work with tones. And the distinction between the two is that noise will come equally on all frequency bands. So noise will generally be, it'll just fill up the whole space here. Something like a voice will have what are called harmonics. So there will be a fundamental, and let's zoom in here just very briefly. There will be something called a fundamental. So this will be the lowest point that you generally will hear. And then the rest of the person's voice or the instrument, whatever, will be made up of a series of harmonic intervals. So it will be this bass frequency stacked up like a ladder, like you can see here. And this is, some people are tempted to refer to this as a voice print, and to a degree it is, but I don't think that could reliably be used to identify anyone. Certainly not in this particular case, and you will see why when we get there. So that's a very brief explanation of how the program works, and we'll be getting slightly deeper into it as we go. So this attempt is going to represent probably my fifth, sixth or more attempt at restoring this audio, and I get varying degrees. I get something slightly different each time I do it. So I've decided that I'm going to break this process into two steps, two separate processes where I basically start from scratch, do it one way, start from scratch, do it the other, and then we'll see what the best results come from. So on one hand, I'm going to go in first and try and eliminate all the noise and eliminate anything that could be interfering first. And in the second, I'm going to leave all the noise there and just try and focus directly on the one area that we need to work with. So the area in question comes at the end of the phone call when Patsy hangs up and we can hear what sound like voices. And that is the area that we're going to be looking into.
Patsy, 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 Patsy.
So you know what, we're actually, before we get into that, we're going to just take one last listen through, and I'm going to describe what I'm hearing. I'll stop the tape and I'll describe what I'm hearing at each point. Okay, so before we get any further, we're hearing a buzz, we're hearing a hiss. This is what you would call a ground loop hum, a 60 cycle hum. We can see that it's happening around 60 hertz down here, around 120 hertz, around 240. This is basically the basis of our electrical system. When you have a cheaper piece of audio equipment that's not properly isolated, where the power component isn't properly separated from the audio recording component, you can get this, what's called a ground loop or a ground hum, in the final recording. So that's what this initial buzz is. Those clicks, I would assume, they almost sound to me like someone tapping a microphone, like someone was recording this with a mic from a speaker. That may not be the case. It could be an inconsistency on the tape. And that brings me to another thing. I believe we are listening to a tape. And that is also pertinent because the way tape works, which is what I believe was used to archive these 911 calls, it is a strip of literally sticky tape that someone has put magnetic dust on. And this magnetic dust is in a totally random fashion. They just dump it on, and that represents noise. If you were to listen to an empty tape, you would hear a hiss or just a basically shh type sound. When you record onto a tape, you have a tape head that is imprinting a magnetic signal onto those magnetic particles. So it's arranging those to form the sound that you are recording onto that tape. So anything that is not affected by that input signal will remain there as noise. There are a handful of reasons why tape is a noisy recording system, but there are a lot of indicators here to me that this is recorded onto either a reel-to-reel or cassette tape. Another factor of tape is that the faster the tape moves, the more accurate a recorded signal you'll get. So if you were to go into a recording studio back in the day, they would be recording maybe at 30 inches per second on a 2-inch tape. That would give you a very accurate representation of the sound that you were putting in. Something like a voice recorder or something like a 911 archive recorder, I would guess would be set to record to a lower speed. And a lower speed means you get more time out of your tape. It means you get more recording for your money, basically. But the trade-off is you get a less accurate sound. And where that accuracy is sacrificed is in the high end, or in the intelligibility, in the openness of the speech. So I believe this recording was made through a telephone, which is not an ideal microphone, onto a tape recorder, which is not an ideal storage device, and then transferred again one or more times before it got to me. So there are a number of ways that noise could have been introduced to this. Noise is an inherent factor in the original recording medium as well, which makes it a little more problematic. But that's enough about tape. Let's keep going through.
911 emergency.
Police.
What's going on?
515th Street.
What's going on there, ma'am?
We have a kidnapping. Hurry, please.
Explain to me what's going on, okay?
There's a note left and our daughter's gone.
A note was left and your daughter is
Yes.
gone? How old is your daughter?
6 years old. She's blind. 6 years old.
How long ago?
Okay, so we have the introduction of the first of the sort of questionable elements. We were hearing the 911 operator and Patsy talk, and then we hear this swishing sound. This sounds to me like it could be the 911 responder writing down something. It sounds like it could be a pen or a pencil swishing on a pad of paper.
She's blind. 6 years old.
How long ago was this?
I don't know. I just found the note. And my daughter's
Does it say who took her?
What?
Does it say who took her?
I don't know. There's a ransom note here.
It's a ransom note?
It says SBTC. Victory. Please.
Okay, what's your name? Are you
Patsy Ramsey. I'm the mother. Oh my God. Please.
I'm sending an officer over, okay?
Please.
Do you know how long she's been gone?
No, I don't. Please, we just got out. Is she right here? Oh my God, please.
Okay,
Please, there's somebody.
I am, honey.
Please.
Take a deep breath,
Please,
okay?
hurry.
Patsy.
Okay, and that was the part in question there at the end. So it sounds to me like there is the sound of a phone hitting the cradle, not fully hanging up. And then as you hear the person in the background talking, that 911 operator goes back to writing down details of the call, if that is what it sounds like, or if that is what it is, the sound of a pencil swishing. So this is the part of the call that's in question, and that is the one that we're going to be focusing on. So from about here,
See?
let's go back a little further.
Patsy.
Okay, I'm going to start from there, and we're just going to remove this first section, and we're also, I don't believe there is anything, we'll take another listen to this before we cut it out, but I don't believe there's anything of note in here. So yeah, speaking of what I was saying before, I don't think a voice print is a reliable way to indicate who is speaking, but I think you can also determine from what we're looking at here, when this is still Patsy talking, this is the 911 operator, and then we see elements of what seem to be a harmonic type of signal, which again indicates to me that this could be a voice. We look in this section at the end, and we're seeing both that electrical noise hum, and we're also seeing just a general broad spectrum noise. So there aren't those distinct bright blobs, it's mostly just a haze. So I am going to say that that is not necessary at this point, and I'm going to cut this out. So the first attempt I'm going to make is going to be what I would call a broadband reduction. So this is going to be looking at the existing noise in the signal, trying to remove that as much as possible first, and then going in and doing some fine details to see if we can pull anything else out. So one of the strengths of this program is that it has the ability to listen to an input signal and then remove that from your source. Actually, yeah, we can say dehum, and that should take care of that 60 hertz hum. So we can say render only.
Patsy, 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 Patsy.
Okay, so that's just a pretty basic one to do. So let's get that, and actually there are quite a few harmonics, so let's extend it. We'll render that, reduced that. Okay, so that takes care of a lot of that lower end stuff. And let's see what else. We'll take a listen again.
Patsy, 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 Patsy.
Okay, so I'd say from here on is the stuff that we're really interested in. What I'm looking for now is, can I find another little bit of noise that's happening where neither Patsy nor the 911 operator are speaking? And I think I may have that right in here. So that sounds like there's nothing else happening, so I'm going to attempt to do a DeNoise. So I'm going to learn from that, I'm going to learn from that sample, and then I'm going to apply that to the rest of the signal.
Patsy, 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 Patsy.
Okay, so that sounds reasonable to me. I'm just going to say, let's try that. And we can now see the background level of noise has decreased quite significantly. The darker it is, the quieter it is, and the brighter it is, the louder it is. So let's take another listen to that now.
Patsy, 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 Patsy.
Okay, let's just give that an overall boost. Just finding it was getting a little too quiet there.
Patsy, 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 Patsy.
Okay, so let's take another shot at that restoration. We'll learn again. We will render it again. Oops. Select our whole file, render it again. And I'm going to say one more time. And then we'll do that same thing. We will increase the gain. And then perhaps once more. So let's take a listen to what we have. That may have been too much, but we'll see.
Patsy, 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 Patsy.
And yeah, so that I think has actually made it worse. We've gone a little bit too far, and that is illustrating one of the issues with this process. You can do a lot of stuff to expose information that's there, but when you're dealing with a lot of noise in the background, you can actually introduce something called artifacting, which is like a little warble, a little wobble in the noise that is very easy to mistake for something that it's not. So it could sound like a voice when there's no voice there. It could sound like whatever the thing is that you happen to be looking for. So to me, I'm starting to hear those artifacts. I think I've gone a bit too far. So I'm going to go back to an earlier state and then try again. And you know what? Before we can even get to anything else, I think we need to do something about these pencil scratches, pen scratches, whatever they are, because that is obscuring the sound, I think, more than anything else. So I will try and get rid of those to the best of my ability. And what I'm doing here is basically just grabbing each of those pencil swipes, pen swipes, whatever they are. That's how I'm referring to them, at least as a shorthand. And then we will be able to see if we can remove those. Okay, I think that will do it. There may be one or two more in there that I missed, but I think I got the worst offenders anyway. Okay, can we get a little more? Okay, let's try listen to that one the first time. Okay, so there are a couple in there I think that I missed that I should go and get now. But yeah, that's working out relatively well, I think. So that one, this one, this one. I think this one as well. That's on the borderline of maybe I don't want to touch that because I'm not really sure what that is. Okay. So we'll render these twice, bring it in line with the others, and then let's take a listen. Okay, we'll go back out.
Patsy? Patsy?
So I'm going to say this is the point at which our most interesting stuff happens. So I am going to get rid of, again, the end of our file and just make things a little bit easier for us to get around. So get rid of that. And I'm going to get rid of everything but the last time she says Patsy. I'm going to take one last shot at getting that a slightly better noise reduction out of this. So we're going to learn this first, then we'll preview.
Patsy? 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 Patsy?
Okay, so I'm rendering that now. I think that may be the best I can do before we start getting into those artifacts. And okay, I'm going to cut out the last time.
Patsy?
I'm going to cut out the last time she says Patsy. And now this is what we're dealing with. This is the heart of a lot of controversy. What exactly is happening here? So this is how I got to this point. I'm going to do my best to restore this if possible, to explain what I'm seeing and to explain some of the interpretations that this has received over the years. Okay, so before we go any further, I can see there's this line in the center. Oops, gotta grab this one. This line in the center that is constant across the whole thing. That means it must be noise, so we don't need that. So I'm going to do a little more spectral repair. We're going to attenuate that and listen again. Okay, so I am tempted now to apply a little bit of EQ. So we can see that there's not really much in the high end. I mentioned earlier that the high end, or the mid and the high end of the frequency spectrum, is where the intelligibility of speech tends to live, and that is what we're looking for here. So I will attempt a bit of an EQ here, and it might get a little unpleasant because I'm probably going to be cranking up, the nastiest sounding bits. Actually, it looks like I have the same setting from the last time I used it. So let's try that out. Let's see how this sounds. Okay, before we go any further, I'm going to give it another gain. I'm just going to turn up that volume again. So we're turning up the volume. Again, that turns up the noise, but it also turns up our signal. So we'll take another listen. Okay, I see, let's take, our horizontal rule. I see what could be the fundamental tone of a voice around 300 hertz. That indicates to me that it is likely a female speaker. Again, we're seeing sort of some indications of what could be harmonic content. Typically, male voices start around 80 to 100 hertz as their fundamentals. Female voice tends to start around 200 to 300 hertz, just as a general rule of thumb. The other complicating factor here is that a phone receiver is not the ideal microphone and isn't that great at representing lower frequencies. Still, I believe that what we are hearing is a female voice. Okay, and I think I can do a little more about these pencil scratches. I do not believe that this is something like this. You can also generally tell what is and is not something you need to worry about by how it stacks up vertically. So, I was mentioning harmonic stuff, it'll look kind of like a ladder. Noisy stuff will look just kind of like a big stack. You can see a lot of these big stacks reaching up. So in the spirit of not overdoing it, I'm going to do that once, and then we'll see if there are still more problematic pencil noises in here. Okay, let's see if we can get a little EQ happening. And it looks like I'm attempting to boost the that just fundamental range where she's speaking, or I believe a female is speaking. Okay, so I think that EQing just adds a little bit more body to that, that lower end. Just gives us a little bit more data in that speech layer. Let's take another listen. Okay, is there anything else that we can do? I could attempt another broadband noise reduction and try and tweak the settings a little more. And I know we were just listening to it. Let's take another listen. I'm going to attempt one more EQ. Let's see if we can get this a little flatter. I'm going to preview it one more time. I don't know if that's making enough of a difference for me to notice. So we may have reached a point where attempting any more restoration could potentially contaminate the results that we have. Because the signal-to-noise ratio is so low, and because attempting some of these repairs can result in that aliasing artifact where you get these wobbles that sort of sound like they could be a number of different things, I think this is as far as I can take it with this method. I'll give it another go with the spot specific and see if it gets any better results. But yeah, this represents broadband noise reduction. And let's take another listen, and I will give you my thoughts on what I think I'm hearing. So, I believe we're hearing the phone having been hung up. I believe we're hearing the 911 operator writing down the details of the call. And I believe we are hearing, and this is my own personal interpretation, I believe that we are hearing Patsy Ramsey in the background. And it sounds to me, if I were to give my interpretation of what the words being said are, it sounds like, help me, Jesus, help me, Jesus, and then a sound that I am not entirely sure about. So let's listen to that a few more times. And I've probably colored your interpretation by saying that, but again, this is, those things that I just said are probably the least controversial interpretation of what is here. And so this section right here has been one that the supposition is that this first point is Patsy Ramsey saying, help me, Jesus. This second point is either John or Burke saying, what did you find, or go back to bed. And then this one is, I believe people have ascribed this to Burke Ramsey, and they said this is the smoking gun that proves that he was awake and around. So, issues with that? I would say yes, there are considerable issues with that interpretation of the evidence. Can I say definitively that this is not Burke Ramsey at the end? I don't believe I can say definitively, but I can say that I don't believe so. But again, let's listen to it again. You can make your own interpretation. There are a number of people who believe that this represents 3 people speaking. From my various attempts at restoring it, from what I'm explaining to you now, and from what I'm hearing, I believe this represents 1 person, 1 woman, and I believe it represents Patsy Ramsey. But take a listen, see if you can hear different voices, see if you can hear different words. Again, the signal-to-noise ratio is really not favorable to interpreting this. There is so much noise. There is so much up in this area in particular that would make all of these words discernible, intelligible. And that is just not there. It was just not recorded because of the limitations of all of the recording equipment capturing the signal at the time. So we are left with what we've got here and what we can make out of it. So let's listen to that a few more times. Okay, I'm going to put all of the files that I end up with up on some sort of sharing site. I'll put the links in the description so that you can pore over these yourself if you like. But I believe this is the end of the broadband approach. We're going to take one more approach that is spot specific and see if we get different results, and then I will upload that one as well so you can take a listen. Okay, so that represented the best that I could do with the broadband-based approach. And now I'm going to attempt the spot-specific approach. So I'm going to start the same way just by cutting out all the other stuff, or not start exactly the same way, but I'm going to get back to that one section that we want. And the idea behind splitting the approach and trying it 2 different ways is this. With the broadband approach, the idea is you take a sample of something that you know is just noise, and then you pull that frequency content out, which theoretically leaves you with only the things you want. The spot-based approach is going to take the idea that perhaps the broadband pulls out a few things that we actually wanted to keep in there. Perhaps there were some things that it thought was noise that we don't consider noise. So I will just hit play once just to give everybody a reference for where we're at. Okay, I let it go twice there just because I scratched my beard the second time. So we're going to cut that out. And again, we're left with roughly the same section. And so first we're going to start out by pulling out some of this noise. So the bulk of this work is going to be done with the spectral repair. So I know we were using a little bit of that last time, but we're basically just going to be relying on that pretty heavily this time. So that does a pretty good job of pulling those out. And now let's just pluck out each of these. And actually, I'll stay right at this level. And this one, again, we want to be really careful about just because there is that blob right there that I believe represents speech. So I need to look below before doing this. And if you're wondering why I'm selecting the whole frequency spectrum in the spot-based approach, this is an attempt to help reduce aliasing, because from my description you may be wondering why you don't simply do the spot-based approach every time if it, will get stuff that the other approach might have mistakenly flagged as noise. And the answer is the spot-based approach is much more prone to aliasing and to introducing noises. So by making a full frequency selection, I'm hoping that I can reduce the aliasing, because if you select something in the middle, you're more likely to introduce an artifact. So we will reduce that, and that looks pretty good. And let's go back again. And you know what? Yeah, I don't like that. I think we were better off with that original approach. So we go back. There's nothing up top that we need. And I don't know what that is down there. So really, we don't probably need above that or below that frequency. This noise is mostly in the mid-range. And it did seem to make the signal suffer by selecting all of that stuff in the bottom end. So this is going to be more or less the same. Let's just grab those really big, nasty chunks. And we also may have been overdoing it on the strength. So if I render this, you can see that's quite a big dip. So why don't we reduce the strength a little bit, render it that way. That may even be a bit much. And you know what? We'll reduce the number of bands that it affects. That seems a little more reasonable. Let's take a listen to that. Okay, and you know what? We may need to do just a little bit of that, that broadband stuff. Let's try the adaptive. Preview. Yeah, no, that's, I think the learning it is the way to go for this. And I believe we want a full frequency signal. This could be potentially voice. Again, you're probably seeing a little bit of some pattern happening in the things that we think are likely voice that aren't necessarily represented as clearly in these others. So it's still a little bit ambiguous, but I want to make sure to avoid that just so I'm not contaminating my noise sample. So let's learn from that again and preview. Okay, I don't want any musical noise. Okay, so I'm getting I think some stuff that I believe we can work with. Another way that you can use this software is by just listening to the noise. So this might get a little weird, a little annoying, but I'm just going to basically be listening to try and get only the noise and not any of the other signal that I want. Okay, so that's getting us a little closer. We can see now, anyway, where most of these words that we believe we're working with are located. Okay, there's still a couple of those clicks in there, so let's see if we can get rid of those. Or pencil swishes, or whatever they are. Should remember my sentence. Okay, so I believe below this point, we are not really receiving much of anything. So we just eliminate that entirely. Let's hear how that sounds. So what we can do now is we can attempt to make some selections right around the points in question to see if we can clear up just what's happening there. So anything that's not what we want. Opposite. Minus. Let's try a little bit of that EQ, see if we can get a little something happening there. Okay. Gives us a little more of a boost in that middle section there. Let's see if we can take out some of this. It looks like there's a broadband noise there. Reduce, oops, that is too much. Let's see. Too much. Even that. Okay. See if declicking will do anything there. does not make much of a difference. Decrackle, here we go. Okay, so I'm going to apply a bit of gain to this. And again, this may be representing the best that we can do with this spot-specific analysis because, again, I'm already hearing those artifacts coming in. So let's take a listen again. And I think, actually, I overdid it just a titch there. Okay, so that is, I believe, the best I can do with a broadband and the best I can do with the spot-specific restoration. And to me, the results are profoundly ambiguous. I gave my interpretation the last time that it could be Patsy Ramsey's voice. That is an interpretation I would lean towards, I could understand. I don't hear a second voice, let alone a third voice. But I think I can help explain how and why both people hear those things and why, in general, this is an ambiguous to, I'm tempted to say worthless piece of evidence, but I am not the first person, I am not the first audio engineer to look at this and say, there's nothing here that we can use. There's nothing here that proves anything. So why do people think that this is the big smoking gun that it is? Why are some people content to write a script that assigns words to 3 different speakers for what we just heard in a couple of different ways? Here's why. So I've included links to all of these articles, web pages, etc. in the description, but I believe this is a pretty important point, and I've seen a few people dismiss this as soon as this is brought up in relation to interpreting this kind of evidence, but this is a very important factor. People will see patterns in things when patterns are not there. If you are looking for something, if you have something in the back of your mind, like your subconscious will influence what you perceive in a signal that is so noisy, it's hard to tell what is the signal and what is the noise. So it's called Pareidolia. I think that's how you pronounce it. You can check this out. This is mostly about visual indications of it, but there's one that everyone is pretty familiar with, called a mondegreen, I think, and that is when certain words blend together to sound like other words. So the most famous one to me is there's a Jimi Hendrix song called Purple Haze. The lyric is, "Excuse me while I kiss the sky," and it sounds like he's saying, "Excuse me while I kiss this guy." So it's just a little simple audio illusion, a way that your ears can be tricked into hearing something that isn't actually there. Another thing that can happen is auditory masking. So that's when 2 sounds can happen at the same time and they can create a sound that isn't there. And I'll give you just a very brief example from my time working in TV. I worked on a home improvement show that had very strict rules. There was no cursing that happened on this show. During one of the big reveals at the end of the show, when the clients were presented with, "Hey, here's your brand new house," it sounded like one of them said "fuck," And that was a big no-no. We had to, make sure that anything that was in there either got bleeped or removed, or it just wasn't that kind of show. It wasn't that kind of network that it was broadcast on. So as soon as I heard that, my ears perked up, and I thought, okay, I got to get rid of this. And I went channel by channel through each of the dialogue tracks, the host and each of the homeowners, and it wasn't there. And it was driving me crazy because as soon as I listened to the mix, I could clearly hear one of them say, "Oh, fuck." And when I listened to their track individually, one of them said, "Oh, wow." And yet I was hearing this noise. And what it turned out was happening was the host had brushed their arm against their shirt and created this swish sound while one of the contestants said, "ah." And at the same time, there was a noise, a drum sound coming from one of the music tracks that gave it this click sound. And the combination of those three things created this word that wasn't actually there. And it was a problem because even though it wasn't there, as soon as you heard it, it sounded like it was. And, your ear is triggered to respond to that, especially when you're in that circumstance of making sure that you're the one to take that out. So, I rearranged music, sound effects, whatever I needed to do, and it disappeared. But the fact of the matter was, it was never there in the first place. It was a stack of sounds that came together to create the illusion that it was there. And speaking of audio illusions, there's a number here that you can try. There's a couple of links I put in here. There's a woman named Deutsch. I think this one is particularly relevant to this interpretation because this one will let you hear different words depending on what you have going on in your brain, and different people from different cultures will hear different words. You'll hear these things that you think, oh, well, this is what they're saying. And then you look at the comments from other people who are listening and they're getting something totally different. And then you listen back again and you can start to hear these different things. So I would not discount the impact of pareidolia in this particular case. Another thing is what we mentioned before about these aliasing, these artifacts, these little things that you can introduce in the act of either recording or transferring something from tape to digital, or in the act of editing digital audio. So there's a number of different places where different sounds can be introduced. And I've got a little explanation of aliasing a couple of different things if you want to look at how this actually works. And the last thing, and this one is again one that I don't see a lot of people talking about, and I think this is a big reason why this is not a bigger piece of evidence, or why audio professionals are not making a bigger deal out of this particular piece of evidence. Because when we, let's go back, when we listen, we hear a rhythmic harmonic sound. This is likely being recorded on a tape recorder. This is 1996. Digital audio was not exactly in a place where it could be used for long-term archival purposes. So we are hearing a repeated sound. I believe it's a voice, but the possibility is that this may not even be a voice, because being that it's recorded on a tape recorder, it could be this. So tape recorders are mechanical pieces of equipment. Some things get out of alignment, some things get a little squeaky, get a little rusty. And like we said, like we saw with the noise from the power system that was being imparted on the signal, you can have other things that are imparting a sound onto your recording medium. And like I've said a few times already, when you're dealing with something where the signal and the noise are so closely related, ideally you want a gigantic signal to noise ratio where your signal is at 1,000,000 and your noise is at 1. We're dealing with something where the noise and the signal are so close in level that any attempt to pull something out of it risks then introducing something that can contaminate what it is. So is it possible this is Patsy Ramsey? Absolutely. Is it possible that this is, in part a squeaky tape recorder, a squeaky motor? Possibly. Is it possible that it represents 3 people speaking? I have a hard time with that interpretation, but I've done my best to give you the cleanest, clearest thing that I can, and you can make your interpretation from there. So I hope this has been helpful, enlightening for some people, and all the links to all the files will be in the description. Thank you.